On December 17, 1944, in a frozen clearing east of Bühlingen, Belgium, a German officer knelt beside a dead American private and opened his pack. The body was still warm. The snow around it had barely settled. The American, from the 99th Infantry Division, based on his shoulder patch, had been killed less than an hour earlier, during the opening shock of what would become the largest battle the United States Army fought in all of World War II. The German officer was not looking for intelligence. He was not searching for maps or codebooks. He was looking for food. His men hadn't eaten a hot meal in 2 days. He unbuckled the canvas flap of the M1928 haversack and pulled out the contents, one by one. And then he stopped. Inside that pack was a world he did not recognize. 3 boxed meals, breakfast, dinner, supper, each sealed in wax-coated cardboard. He opened one. Canned meat, processed cheese, crackers that hadn't gone stale. A small bar of chocolate wrapped in foil. 4 cigarettes, real ones, not the cabbage leaf substitutes his men had been smoking for months. Matches, chewing gum, powdered coffee, sugar cubes, a tiny envelope of lemon drink powder, a plastic spoon, and folded beneath the spoon, sheets of toilet paper. Toilet paper. On a battlefield. He set the ration box aside and kept going. A small canvas pouch held a safety razor, a Gillette, with a packet of 5 fresh blades. Next to it, a bar of soap, still in its wrapper. A toothbrush. A sewing kit no bigger than a man's palm, with needles, thread, and spare buttons. A waterproof poncho, folded tight. Half a shelter tent. And clipped to the belt, a first aid pouch containing a sterile bandage and a packet of white powder labeled sulfanilamide, a synthetic antibiotic, in the pocket of a private. The story of what American soldiers carried into battle and what it told the enemy about the country that sent them starts here. If these stories matter to you, hit subscribe and like. Here is what you need to understand about that moment in the snow. That German officer was not some rear echelon clerk dazzled by American luxury. He was a combat veteran. He had fought on the Eastern Front. He had seen Soviet equipment, British equipment, French equipment. He knew what armies carried. And nothing in his experience had prepared him for what he was holding. Because this was not an officer's kit. This was not a special forces loadout. This was the standard issue of an American private, a 19-year-old rifleman from somewhere in Ohio or Kansas or Virginia who had been in Europe for less than 3 months and was already dead in a Belgian forest. And he had been carrying on his back a quality and quantity of personal supplies that no German field marshal could requisition in December of 1944. Remember that detail, the sulfanilamide powder. It will come back. And when it does, it will mean something very different from what you think it means right now. The German offensive that killed that private was called Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine. Adolf Hitler had planned it for months. 250,000 men thrown against 80 miles of thinly held American line in the Ardennes forest. The goal was breathtaking. Punch through, cross the Meuse River, drive 100 miles to Antwerp, split the British and American armies in 2, and force a negotiated peace in the west before the Soviets closed in from the east. It was, by any measure, a desperate gamble. Hitler knew it. His generals knew it. Field Marshal Gerhard von Wunstedt, the nominal commander, had privately called the plan insane. But Hitler had made one calculation that almost nobody around him challenged: that American soldiers were soft. That an army raised on comfort would not hold when hit hard enough, fast enough, in the coldest winter Europe had seen in decades. In the first 48 hours, the calculation appeared to be right. German armor punched through at multiple points. Entire American units were overrun. 7,000 men of the 106th Infantry Division surrendered at the Schnee Eifel, the second largest mass surrender in United States Army history. Panic rippled through rear areas, roads jammed with retreating vehicles, radio communications collapsed. For a brief, terrifying window, it looked like the Western Front might crack. But something strange was happening inside the German advance, something the planners had not anticipated. At captured American positions, in abandoned camps and supply points, German soldiers were stopping. Not because they were meeting resistance, but because they were finding things. Crates of rations, stacks of blankets, jerrycans of gasoline, boxes of cigarettes, medical kits with drugs they had never seen, and packs. Hundreds of packs, pulled from the dead and the captured in the abandoned foxholes. Each one containing the same impossible inventory. Each one a small, portable museum of a country that could afford to wage war on a scale Germany could no longer imagine. What those German soldiers found in those packs, and what their officers wrote about it afterward, is one of the quietest and most devastating stories of the entire war. Because what left them speechless was not chocolate. It was not cigarettes. It was something that no amount of courage, no tactical brilliance, and no Wunderwaffe could overcome. And it was sitting in the pocket of a dead 19-year-old from Ohio. On December 1st, 1944, in a forest east of the German town of Prüm, a 20-year-old Volksgrenadier named, according to the unit log of the 277th Volksgrenadier Division, simply as Schützebrandt, was told to check his equipment for a major operation. He did not know what operation. He did not know where. He only knew he had been transferred from a training depot 6 weeks earlier, that his division had been rebuilt from the shattered remnants of a unit destroyed in Normandy, and that the older men in his company looked at him the way doctors look at terminal patients who don't yet know their diagnosis. He opened his Tornister 39, the standard Wehrmacht infantry pack, and laid out everything he owned. 1 loaf of Kommissbrot, army bread. It was supposed to last 3 days. The recipe had changed 4 times since 1941. Each change subtracting something. First, the wheat content dropped, then rye flour replaced it, then potato starch appeared, then sawdust. Soldiers called the latest version Holzbrot, wood bread. It tasted the way it sounded. 1 tin of Fleischkonserve, canned meat. Except by December of 1944, the word meat had become generous. The tin contained mostly cereal filler and rendered fat, with enough pork to justify the label. 1 packet of ersatz coffee, roasted barley and chicory, no caffeine, no warmth in the taste, just brown, hot water. 6 rounds of rifle ammunition beyond what he carried in his pouches. That was it. No chocolate, no cigarettes. Tobacco had been rationed since 1942, and by late 44, frontline troops received 4 cigarettes per day when supply lines held, which they increasingly did not. No chewing gum, no lemon powder, no instant anything, no toilet paper. Brandt, like every German infantryman on the Western Front, used whatever he could find. Newspaper, leaves, nothing. No razor blades. He had 1 blade that he had been resharpening on the inside of a glass for 3 weeks. No soap. Soap required fats, and fats went to munitions production. The Wehrmacht had officially stopped issuing soap to individual soldiers in the autumn of 1943. And no sulfa powder. No antibiotic of any kind. His first aid kit contained a bandage. If the bandage was not enough, he would wait for a medic, if one was alive, and hope the wound did not become infected. If it did, he would hope for sulfonamide tablets at the field hospital, if there were any left, and if the hospital had not been bombed. Hold that thought. Because what Schützebrandt carried, and what he did not carry, was not a failure of planning. It was not a shortage that could be fixed. It was the visible surface of something much larger. Something that German officers understood with brutal clarity, even if the soldiers on the ground did not. Germany was running out of everything. Not slowly, not eventually. Right now, in real time, at an accelerating rate that no amount of Albert Speer's production miracles could reverse. Here is a number that tells the story faster than any paragraph. In 1944, the United States produced 800,000 trucks. Germany produced under 90,000. That is not a gap. That is a different universe. And trucks were just the beginning. The disparity ran through every category of production: steel, aluminum, rubber, fuel, ammunition, aircraft, ships, radios, medical supplies, like a crack through the foundation of a building. Every month, the crack widened. Every month, more weight pressed down on it. But here is the part that mattered most, the part that German officers noticed and American officers rarely thought about. The disparity did not stop at tanks and planes. It reached all the way down to the bottom of a private's pack, all the way down to the chocolate bar, all the way down to the toilet paper. Because the United States was not merely outproducing Germany in weapons. It was outproducing Germany in humanity. In the small, ordinary, supposedly trivial things that keep a man functioning as a man and not just a body with a rifle. A razor so he could shave. Soap so he could wash. Coffee so he could feel warm. Toilet paper so he could maintain a shred of dignity in a frozen foxhole at 3 a.m. with artillery falling 200 yards away. The German High Command understood something about this that most history books skip over entirely. They had captured American packs before. In North Africa in 1943, in Sicily, in Italy. Intelligence officers had cataloged the contents. Reports had been written. And those reports had said, in the clinical language of military analysis, something that amounted to a death sentence for the Third Reich. But the specific words, the exact phrases that appear in those captured documents, are not what you might expect. They did not say, "The Americans have better supplies." They said something far more disturbing, something that went beyond logistics and into the territory of civilizational comparison. And to understand what they said, you first need to understand what was inside that chocolate bar. Not the taste, not the sugar, the system that put it there. On February 20th, 1943, in the aftermath of the Battle of Kasserine Pass, Tunisia, German soldiers of the 10th Panzer Division walked through an abandoned American supply dump south of Sabatla and stopped talking. Kasserine was a German victory, one of the few clean ones left. Rommel's Africa Corps had punched through green American troops of the 1st Armored Division and the 34th Infantry Division, killing over 300, wounding nearly 3,000, and capturing almost 3,000 more. The Americans had broken. They had retreated in disorder. Tanks had been abandoned, radios left behind. Command posts overrun so fast that maps were still pinned to the walls. By every measure, this was proof that Hitler was right. The Americans were amateurs, soft, unready. And then the Germans opened the supply dump. Stacked floor to ceiling, cases of canned meat, each can marked with a date of production less than 4 months old. Cases of real coffee, not ersatz, not chicory, not roasted grain. Coffee. From Brazil, roasted in New Jersey, packed in vacuum-sealed tins, shipped across the Atlantic, trucked across North Africa, and left behind by a retreating army that apparently had so much of it that losing a depot's worth was an inconvenience, not a catastrophe. There were cases of cigarettes, Camels, Lucky Strikes, Chesterfields, brands that German officers recognized from pre-war American magazines. Cases of powdered milk, cases of canned fruit, and medical supplies, crates of sulfanilamide, crates of morphine syrettes, crates of plasma, real blood plasma, freeze-dried and packaged for field transfusion. A German officer attached to the 10th Panzer Division, his report survived in the Bundesarchiv, wrote a document that was forwarded to Berlin. The language was restrained. The implications were not. He noted that the American army had been in North Africa for barely 3 months, that the troops at Kasserine were poorly trained and badly led, that tactically they had failed. And then he noted that the defeated American army had left behind more medical supplies in one supply dump than his entire division had received in the previous 6 months. He noted that American privates carried individual first aid packets containing sulfanilamide, a drug that German field hospitals were rationing. He noted that the food was not merely adequate, but, in his words, astonishingly varied. And he noted one detail that, reading the report decades later, lands harder than anything else on the page. He noted that the Americans had left behind soap. Not a bar of soap, cases of soap, individually wrapped, for individual soldiers. This is where the story changes direction, because at Kasserine, Germany won the battle and saw the future. And the future was not a bigger gun or a faster tank. The future was soap in a private's pack. Think about what that meant to a German officer in February of 1943. His own men were washing, when they washed at all, with sand, or with the thin, gritty, clay-based substitute that the Reich's chemical industry had produced after animal fats were redirected to glycerin production for explosives. His own men were developing skin infections at rates that were becoming a medical problem. Infections led to hospital time. Hospital time removed soldiers from the line. And Germany, by 1943, could no longer replace soldiers the way it had replaced them in 41. Meanwhile, America was wrapping individual bars of soap in wax paper and putting them in the pockets of 19-year-old privates who had been soldiers for less than a year. Not because soap was a luxury, because someone, some quartermaster, some logistician, some bureaucrat at a desk in Washington, had done the arithmetic and concluded that a clean soldier gets fewer infections, spends fewer days in the hospital, and stays on the line longer. Soap was not comfort. Soap was a weapon. It just didn't look like one. And the same arithmetic governed every single item in that pack. The chocolate bar, Hershey's Field Ration D, was not candy. It was designed to deliver 600 calories in a bar that would not melt at 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The Army had told Hershey it should taste only a little better than a boiled potato, because if soldiers liked it too much, they would eat it before they needed it. The 4 cigarettes per meal were not a treat. Nicotine suppresses appetite, steadies hands, and calms nerves. The Army had studied this. The toilet paper was not a comfort. Dysentery was the second largest cause of non-combat casualties in the Mediterranean theater, and hygiene was the first line of defense. Every item in that pack had been argued over, tested, revised, tested again, mass-produced, shipped across an ocean, and placed in the hands of a man who probably never thought about why it was there. And that was the point. The American soldier did not need to think about it. The system thought about it for him. Remember the German officer's report from Kasserine. He had watched his side win. He had watched the Americans break and run. And yet something in that supply dump told him a truth that the battlefield had not. That this war was going to be decided not by who fought better, but by who could sustain the fight longer. And the answer to that question was sitting in a wax-coated cardboard box, next to a chocolate bar that tasted like a boiled potato. What he could not have known, what no one in the Africa Corps could have known in February of 43, was that the system behind that box was about to grow enormously. And the man responsible for that growth had just been given a job that did not yet have a name. On July 10th, 1943, on a beach near Gela, Sicily, a 23-year-old private first class from the 1st Infantry Division named Donald Whitaker took a rifle round through his left thigh. The bullet shattered his femur and exited through the back of his leg, leaving a wound the size of a fist. In 1917, that wound would have killed him. Not from blood loss, from infection. In World War I, the fatality rate for compound fractures of the femur was over 80%, almost entirely because bacteria entered the wound faster than surgeons could reach it. A man hit in the thigh in the Argonne forest in 1918 had, statistically, less than 1 chance in 5 of keeping his leg, and not much better odds of keeping his life. Donald Whitaker did not know any of this. He knew that his leg was broken and that the pain was unlike anything he had imagined. He knew that he was lying in sand that was being churned by mortar rounds, and he knew that the first thing the medic did, before the morphine, before the splint, before anything, was tear open a small paper packet from Whitaker's own belt pouch and pour white powder directly into the open wound. Sulfanilamide, 5 grams. The same packet that the German officer in the Ardennes would find 18 months later and hold in his hands without fully understanding what it meant. Here is what it meant. It meant that Donald Whitaker's wound, packed with sulfanilamide powder within 4 minutes of injury, did not develop gas gangrene. It did not develop sepsis. It did not require amputation. Whitaker was evacuated to a field hospital, then to North Africa, then to England. He walked again by March of 1944. He returned to the 1st Division in time for Normandy. 1 packet, 5 grams, a man's leg, a man's life. And every American soldier in the theater was carrying one. Now hold that against what was happening on the other side. By the summer of 1943, Germany's supply of sulfonamide drugs, the same family of chemicals, was adequate for hospitals but not for individual soldiers. A German infantryman hit in the thigh on Sicily received a bandage from his first aid kit. Just a bandage. If he was lucky, a medic reached him within an hour and applied sulfonamide at the company aid station. If the medic was dead, or the aid station overrun, or the road to the rear cut, he waited. And while he waited, bacteria multiplied. The difference in wound infection rates between American and German infantry in the Mediterranean theater in 1943 was not small. American forces reported wound infection rates of roughly 4 to 5%. German forces, by their own medical records, reported rates 3 to 4 times higher. And those records were incomplete, because by mid-43, German medical record-keeping was itself becoming a casualty of the supply crisis. This was not a secret. German military doctors wrote about it. They requested more sulfonamide. They requested individual first aid packets with antibiotics. The requests went to the Army Medical Inspectorate in Berlin. The inspectorate forwarded them to the procurement office. The procurement office forwarded them to the chemical industry. And the chemical industry said, "We cannot produce enough. The raw materials are allocated to other priorities. Explosives, synthetic fuel, rubber substitutes." The war ate its own medicine. And this is where the meaning of that pack begins to shift. Because the sulfa powder was not just one item among many. It was a signal, a small, white, 5-gram signal of something that German officers were beginning to articulate in language that went beyond logistics. The United States could afford to protect its privates, not just arm them, not just feed them, protect them from infection, from disease, from the 1,000 small degradations that turn a fighting man into a patient. America had so much industrial capacity that it could allocate resources to keeping a 19-year-old rifleman clean, fed, medicated, and psychologically intact, and still produce more tanks, more planes, more artillery, and more ammunition than Germany, Japan, and Italy combined. That was what the German officer at Kasserine had sensed, but not yet named. And it was what a different German officer, a medical officer, Oberstabsarzt Friedrich Hesse, attached to the Hermann Göring division in Sicily, put into words in a report that survives in fragments. He had examined captured American medical equipment after the fighting around Gela. He had catalogued the contents, and he had written a single sentence that his superiors in Berlin underlined twice. He wrote that the Americans had solved a problem Germany had not yet acknowledged it had. The problem was not tactical. The problem was not strategic. The problem was that modern war consumed human beings at a rate that only an industrial economy designed around the preservation of human beings could sustain. And Germany's economy was not designed around the preservation of human beings. It was designed around the production of weapons. The people who operated those weapons were, in the logic of the system, replaceable. Until they were not. By December of 1944, by the time Schütze stood in the forest near Prüm with his wood bread and his single resharpened razor blade, Germany had lost over 4 million soldiers on all fronts. The replacement system was pulling 17-year-olds from schools and 50-year-olds from factories. The men arriving at the front were younger, weaker, sicker, and less equipped than at any point in the war. And across the line, every single American private still carried his soap, his razor, his coffee, his chocolate, his sulfa powder, and his toilet paper. As if nothing had changed. As if the war were easy. As if this abundance were the natural state of things. It was not easy, but the system made it look that way. And that illusion, that maddening, demoralizing illusion, was about to be tested by the largest German offensive in the West. An offensive whose success depended on one thing above all others: captured American fuel. What the Germans found instead of fuel is a story that begins with a man named Otto Skorzeny, and a plan so audacious that it required German soldiers to become, for a few critical days, the one thing they could not become: Americans. On October 28, 1944, in a restricted compound at the Grafenwöhr training grounds in Bavaria, Otto Skorzeny stood in front of a warehouse full of problems. Skorzeny was 36 years old, 6'4", with a dueling scar across his left cheek that made him look exactly like what he was, the most dangerous commando in the German military. He had rescued Mussolini from a mountaintop prison. He had kidnapped the son of the Hungarian regent to prevent Hungary from leaving the war. Hitler trusted him with operations that no one else would attempt. And now, Hitler had given him the most audacious assignment of all: assemble a brigade of English-speaking German soldiers, dress them in American uniforms, equip them with American weapons, put them in American vehicles, and send them behind American lines during the Ardennes offensive to spread chaos, cut communications, misdirect traffic, and, if possible, seize bridges over the Meuse River before the Americans could blow them. The operation was called Greif. Griffin. It required one thing above all others: American equipment. Real American equipment. Uniforms, helmets, web gear, dog tags, cigarettes, ration boxes, jeeps, trucks, at least a few tanks. Everything had to be authentic, because a single wrong detail, a belt buckle, a boot sole, the wrong brand of cigarette, would get a man shot on sight. Hitler had promised unlimited support. Skorzeny sent requisition orders to every prisoner of war camp and equipment depot in the Reich. He needed uniforms for 3,000 men. He needed 100 American vehicles. He needed weapons, radios, and personal equipment, down to the wallets and the pocket Bibles. What he received over the next 6 weeks tells you everything the rest of this story has been building toward. He got enough uniforms for about 800 men. Many were incomplete. A jacket without matching trousers. Summer weight where winter weight was needed. Some had been taken from American dead in Normandy and still bore bloodstains that could not be fully washed out. He got 2 Sherman tanks. He had requested 20. He got a handful of American half-tracks, about 15 jeeps, and a collection of trucks so battered that his mechanics spent more time repairing them than his soldiers spent training in them. He got almost no personal equipment. And this is the detail that matters. Skorzeny's men could perhaps pass a distant visual inspection in a stolen jacket and helmet. But the moment anyone looked closely, the moment an MP at a checkpoint asked for identification, or a suspicious GI glanced at what was in a man's pockets, the illusion would collapse. Because a real American soldier carried things that a German soldier could not replicate. The cigarettes were wrong. Skorzeny's men had German tobacco or nothing. A real GI had Luckies or Camels in a wax paper K-Rations sleeve. The chocolate was wrong. German military chocolate, when it existed at all, was a different shape, different wrapper, different taste. The gum was wrong. Wrigley's spearmint had a specific foil wrapper that no German factory could reproduce. The first aid packet was wrong. A German imitation would not contain sulfanilamide powder in the correct American packaging. Even the toilet paper was wrong. American military-issue toilet paper was a specific weight and texture, folded in a specific way, packed in a specific place inside the ration box. A German substitute would feel different in the hand. Skorzeny knew this. His intelligence officers cataloged every item in a captured American pack and wrote specifications for German imitations. The result was a document of absurd despair, page after page of items that Germany could describe in perfect detail, but could not produce at any scale. They could analyze the chocolate. They could not make the chocolate. They could photograph the razor blades. They could not manufacture the razor blades. They could diagram the entire K-ration box, layer by layer, item by item, calorie by calorie, and they could not replicate a single one. In the end, Skorzeny sent his men behind American lines, carrying a mixture of captured and improvised equipment that would not survive close scrutiny. He knew it. They knew it. The English-speaking commandos of Einheit Stielau, the small team infiltration unit, were told to avoid prolonged contact with real Americans. Get in, cause confusion, get out. Do not stop at a field kitchen. Do not share a cigarette. Do not let anyone search your pockets. Several teams were caught within the first 48 hours. Some were betrayed by their accents, some by their behavior, but others were caught for a reason that Skorzeny had feared from the beginning. Their equipment was wrong. An MP near Liège noticed that a captured commando's boots had hobnails, German style, instead of the rubber composition soles of American combat boots. Another team was stopped because the ration box in their Jeep was empty in a way that no American would allow. No crumpled wrappers, no cigarette butts, no gum stuck to the cardboard. The Jeep was too clean. The Americans, it turned out, left traces of abundance everywhere they went, the way a river leaves mud on its banks. And the Germans, no matter how carefully they prepared, left traces of scarcity. 3 captured Greif commandos were executed by firing squad at Henri-Chapelle on December 23, 1944. They died wearing American uniforms they could not fill with American lives. But Skorzeny's failure was not the most devastating revelation of that December, because while his commandos were being caught at checkpoints, something far more damaging was happening deeper inside the German advance. Something that no one had planned for. Something that was doing more to slow the offensive than minefields, artillery, or American resistance. German soldiers were finding American supply dumps, and they were refusing to leave. On December 17, 1944, one day into the offensive, lead elements of Kampfgruppe Piper, the spearhead of the 6th SS Panzer Army, overran an American fuel depot near Bühlingen. Piper's column was the sharpest blade in the Ardennes attack. 30 tanks, including a company of King Tigers, supported by half-tracks, armored cars, and 2 battalions of Panzer Grenadiers. His orders were simple and impossible. Drive west at maximum speed, cross the Meuse, and do not stop for anything. Piper did not stop for the fuel depot. He ordered his tanks to refuel from the captured stocks, 50,000 gallons of American gasoline, and move on. This was disciplined. This was correct. This was exactly what the plan required. But behind Piper, the rest of the German advance was not Piper. South of Bühlingen, units of the 277th Volksgrenadier Division, Schütze-Bronze Division, pushed through positions abandoned by the shattered 99th Infantry Division and found what the Americans had left behind. Not just fuel, not just ammunition, everything. A regimental command post, still warm. On the tables, half-eaten meals from cans that the Germans did not recognize. In the tents, sleeping bags, real ones, insulated, with waterproof shells. On the ground, packs, dozens of packs, dropped by men who were running or surrendering or dying. Each pack containing the same inventory that the officer near Bühlingen had catalogued a few hours earlier. The rations, the chocolate, the coffee, the cigarettes, the soap. And the Germans stopped. Not all of them. Not the officers. The officers screamed. The officers waved pistols and threatened courts-martial. But the men, the 18-year-old Volksgrenadiers who had been marching since before dawn on empty stomachs, who had not tasted real coffee in months, who were wearing boots with cardboard soles and coats lined with recycled wool that no longer kept out the cold. These men sat down in the snow next to American foxholes and ate. They ate the canned cheese. They ate the processed meat. They tore open the chocolate bars and swallowed them in pieces. They brewed the instant coffee in their canteen cups over fires made from the wax-coated ration boxes, which, they discovered, burned beautifully, because even the packaging was engineered. They smoked the American cigarettes down to their fingers, and then they smoked the second cigarette, and the third, and the fourth. Some of them wept. Not from emotion, from nicotine hitting a nervous system that had been starved of it for weeks. This scene repeated itself along the entire front, at Honsfeld, at Lanzerath, at Losheim, at a dozen crossroads and supply points from the Schnee-Eifel to the Ohr River. Wherever German infantry overran American positions, the advance developed a stutter, a pause of 30 minutes, an hour, sometimes longer, as starving men encountered a wall of abundance they could not walk past. And here is what that stutter cost. The Ardennes offensive was built on a single assumption: speed. Hitler's planners had calculated that German forces needed to reach the Meuse within 4 days. 4 days. Before American reserves could arrive, before the weather cleared and the Allied air forces turned the roads into killing grounds, before Eisenhower could organize a response. Every hour of delay reduced the chance of success. Every hour gave the Americans time to do what they did better than any army in history: move. On December 17th alone, while German infantry was eating captured K-Rations in the snow, 11,000 American trucks were carrying 60,000 men toward the Ardennes. By the end of the first week, Eisenhower had moved 250,000 soldiers and 50,000 vehicles into the battle. That speed, that logistical response, is still considered one of the greatest feats of military movement ever executed. And it was purchased, in part, by the hours that German soldiers spent sitting in abandoned American foxholes, holding a chocolate bar in one hand and a Lucky Strike in the other. The German officers who witnessed this understood what was happening. They understood it with a clarity that went beyond frustration. A battalion commander of the 12th Volksgrenadier Division, his name appears only as Major W in the divisional after-action report, wrote that his men had become, for a period of approximately 90 minutes, combat ineffective. Not because of American fire, not because of obstacles, because of American food. He used a word that appears in several German reports from that week. The word was Fressgier. It translates, roughly, as feeding frenzy. The connotation is animal, the loss of discipline that occurs when starved creatures encounter food. And the major, writing this word about his own soldiers, was not describing weakness. He was describing the inevitable outcome of a system that had failed them. His men were not cowards. They were not lazy. They were human beings whose bodies had been running on 1,200 calories a day for weeks, thrust suddenly into a landscape where the enemy discarded more food than the Reich could produce. The failure was not in the foxhole. The failure was in Berlin. And the major knew it, because he added one more sentence to his report. a sentence that was not military analysis, but something closer to eulogy. He wrote that upon examining the captured packs, several of his experienced NCOs, men who had fought in Russia, in North Africa, men who had believed in final victory as recently as September, said nothing. They simply looked at each other. And he wrote that in that silence, he recognized something he had been refusing to see for months. What exactly he recognized, and what the senior German intelligence staff concluded when reports like his reached the Army group level, would not be written down until after the offensive had failed. And when it was written down, it contained a single comparison that struck harder than any Allied bomb. In January of 1945, after the Ardennes offensive had collapsed and the last German units had been pushed back behind their starting line, a report was compiled at the headquarters of Army Group B in the Rhineland. It drew on after-action accounts from divisional and regimental commanders across the front. It was not a tactical analysis. It was not a battle summary. It was an attempt to answer a question that the High Command had been avoiding for 2 years. Why German offensives, even when they achieved surprise, could no longer be sustained. The report covered fuel shortages. It covered the absence of air cover. It covered the destruction of the rail network, the lack of replacement troops, the deterioration of tank engines, the shortage of winter clothing. All of it expected, all of it known, all of it the slow arithmetic of losing a war of production. And then, in a section that dealt with what the report called Kampfmoral der Truppe, combat morale of the troops, there was a passage that did not read like the rest of the document. The language changed. It became specific. It became quiet. The passage described what German soldiers had found in captured American positions. It listed the contents of the American individual pack with a precision that suggested the author had held each item in his hands. The rations, the medical kit, the toiletries, the personal effects. And it noted something that no previous German intelligence report had stated so directly. It noted that the American pack contained no item that was not functional. Every element served a purpose: nutritional, medical, hygienic, or psychological. And yet the total effect of these functional items, taken together, was not functional at all. It was emotional. It communicated something to the soldier who carried it, and it communicated something entirely different to the enemy soldier who captured it. To the American, the pack said, "You are valued. Your comfort matters. Your health matters. Your morale matters. You are not a replaceable component. You are a man, and the nation that sent you here has thought about what you need to remain a man under conditions designed to strip that away." To the German who opened that pack, it said something else. And this is the passage that was underlined. The report stated that the psychological effect of captured American personal equipment on German troops was, in certain units, more demoralizing than artillery bombardment. Not because of envy. The word the author used was not Neid, envy. The word was Erkenntnis, recognition. The recognition that the gulf between the two armies was not a matter of more or less, better or worse, richer or poorer. It was a gulf of kind. Two fundamentally different systems had sent two fundamentally different kinds of armies into the field. One system asked how many tanks it could build. The other system asked how many tanks it could build and how many razor blades. The report drew a comparison. It stated that in the last quarter of 1944, Germany had concentrated its entire remaining industrial capacity on 3 priorities: fighter aircraft, U-boat components, and V-weapons. Everything else, food, clothing, medicine, personal equipment, transport, maintenance, had been designated as secondary. The result was that Germany could still produce weapons that were, in some cases, individually superior to their Allied counterparts. A Panther tank was better than a Sherman. A Messerschmitt 262 was faster than a Mustang. An MG-42 was more lethal than a Browning. But the men who operated those weapons were hungry. They were sick. They were filthy. They were demoralized. And they could not be replaced. The American system, the report observed, had made no such choice. It had not sacrificed the soldier for the weapon. It had produced both. It had produced the Sherman and the razor blade, the Mustang and the chocolate bar, the artillery shell and the toilet paper. And it had done so in quantities that rendered the question of individual superiority irrelevant. A Panther tank is better than a Sherman, but the Americans had built 49,000 Shermans. Germany had built 6,000 Panthers. A German machine gunner can outperform an American squad. But the American squad has been fed, shaved, medicated, and rested. And behind it, there are 9 more squads. And behind those squads, there are trucks carrying hot food. And behind the trucks, there is a replacement depot. And behind the depot, there is a port. And behind the port, there is an ocean. And on the other side of that ocean, there is a country that can do this forever. That was the recognition. That was the Erkenntnis. Not that America was richer, every German officer already knew that, but that American wealth had been converted into a system that preserved human beings at the same rate that it produced machines. And Germany had no answer for that. No weapon, no tactic, no wonder technology, no amount of courage. The passage ended without a recommendation. There was nothing to recommend. You cannot close a gap of civilizational capacity with a memorandum. And somewhere in the Rhineland, in a cold office with a window facing west, the officer who wrote those words set down his pen. Outside, the sound of American artillery, its rhythm steady, unbroken, unhurried, as if the ammunition would never run out, rolled across the river. It would not stop until May. The private from the 99th Infantry Division, the one lying in the snow near Bühlingen with his pack open and his war over, was never identified in this story. He was one of several hundred men from the 99th who were killed in the first 48 hours of the Ardennes offensive. But here is what happened to the division he died in. The 99th Infantry Division, green, untested, on the line for less than a month, absorbed the full force of the 6th SS Panzer Army's assault on December 16th and 17th. They were outnumbered. They were hit in the dark, in a snowstorm, by veteran formations that included Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, the most decorated division in the Waffen-SS. They lost ground. They lost men. And then they stopped losing. On a ridge called Elsenborn, the 99th, together with the 2nd Infantry Division, dug in and held. They held for 6 days of continuous German assault. They held while Kampfgruppe Peiper drove past them to the south. They held while the 106th Division collapsed on their flank. They held through artillery barrages, infantry attacks, and 2 armored thrusts that came within 400 yards of their command post. The 6th SS Panzer Army, the most powerful formation Hitler had left, never broke through on the northern shoulder of the Bulge. It was stopped, permanently, by 2 American infantry divisions on a frozen ridge. Those men held because they were brave, but they also held because they had eaten breakfast that morning, because their wounds were treated with sulfa powder, because their feet were wrapped in dry socks pulled from their packs, because their rifles were cleaned with the small bottles of oil that came in their maintenance kits, because they had slept, the night before, under shelter halves that kept the snow off their faces, because they were, in the language of the German report, preserved. Schütze Brandt, the 20-year-old Volksgrenadier from the 277th Division, his fate is not recorded individually. The division took heavy casualties in the Ardennes and was pushed back to its starting positions by late January. It was transferred east in March and surrendered to Soviet forces near the Ruhr Pocket in April of 1945. Whether Brandt survived is unknown. His name appears once in the unit log, then never again. Otto Skorzeny survived the war. He was tried at Dachau for violations of the laws of war related to Operation Greif. He was acquitted, in part because a British officer testified that the Allies had used similar deception tactics. Skorzeny later escaped from an internment camp, lived in Spain, and died in 1975. He never spoke publicly about the equipment shortages that had crippled his operation. But his private papers, released after his death, contained a single notation from December of '44. It read, "The material requirements for Greif were never met, not even close." The K-Ration, the small, wax-coated box that German soldiers had torn open in the snow, was discontinued after the war. Soldiers had always complained about it. The food was monotonous, the calories insufficient for sustained combat, the taste barely tolerable. Troops called it, among other things, 3 lies in a box. No K, no ration, no food. The Army replaced it with better options in 1946. And yet, of all the artifacts of American industrial power in World War II, the B-17, the Sherman, the Liberty ship, the atomic bomb, none told the story more completely than that small cardboard box. Because the box was not a weapon, it was a philosophy. A philosophy that said, the man matters, not just the rifle in his hands, the man, his stomach, his skin, his teeth, his dignity. Take care of the man, and the man will take care of the war. Germany built the Panther and the Tiger and the jet fighter and the ballistic missile. And then it sent its soldiers into the Ardennes with wood bread and no soap. America built the Sherman and the Mustang and the landing craft and the atomic bomb. And then it put a chocolate bar and a razor and a packet of sulfa powder in the pocket of every private it sent across the ocean. One country built weapons, the other built an army. That is what left German officers speechless in a captured American pack. Not what was in it, what it meant. A country that takes care of its privates will always defeat a country that only takes care of its generals. And in the snow near Bühlingen, on the morning of December 17th, 1944, a German officer knelt beside a dead American boy, opened his pack, and saw the future. He just did not yet have the word for it. The word was enough. Thank you for watching this to the end. It means more than you might think. If this story stayed with you, the kind of story that most documentaries never tell, then a like genuinely helps. It is how the algorithm learns that these quiet, detailed histories have an audience, and it is how the next one reaches someone who would care about it just as much as you do. If you are not subscribed yet, subscribe now and hit the bell so you do not miss what comes next. I would love to know, where are you watching from today? And if someone in your family served in World War II, tell me about them in the comments. These stories belong to all of us. I will see you in the next one.